There's not that many news outlets that are covering Canadian Jewish arts these days, so we're really doing something unique. Hi, I'm Ilana Zakon.
And I'm David Sklar.
And we're the hosts of Culturally Jewish.
In these times right now of growing anti-Semitism, I think a lot of Jewish artists are feeling very isolated from their own arts communities.
You know, it's very isolating being in the arts world in Canada, and we get a chance to meet people from all over the country who are dealing with it in all sorts of different ways.
It also makes me feel more proud to be a Jewish artist right now. We would say there's no one out there who understands what we're going through, who feels the way we feel. Are we going crazy, right? Or is the world going crazy? And when we get together and we chat with these artists, we say we are not alone, that there are other people who are going through the same thing. And it actually makes me more proud to be a Jew and a Jewish artist.
To support our work and to keep up to date on everything that's happening at the Canadian Jewish News, visit thecjn.ca/donate.
That's my thing. Just like this tie, I want to remember every day in the morning and in the evening and during the day that there are 134 hostages being held there. This orange color is for the kids, the Bibas kids.
Israel's ambassador to Canada, Iddo Moed, still puts on an orange polka dot tie every morning after October 7th, a tribute to the two red-headed Bibas children, baby Kfir and his brother Ariel, who were kidnapped by Hamas terrorists and taken into Gaza that day along with their parents. The last anyone heard, Hamas released a video showing the mother and children being dragged away, and they're believed to be in Khan Yunis. You'll recall Hamas told the world the Bibases were not alive, but Ambassador Moed is hoping fervently that within hours or perhaps days, he'll be able to throw his orange tie away. Because as reports from Israel are coming out, the Bibas kids and one or both of their parents could be released among the very first stages of a pending hostage ceasefire deal currently being negotiated with the help of the U.S. government, Egypt, and Qatar during the final days of the Biden administration. Although the talks seemingly became intenser once President-elect Donald Trump threatened there would be hell to pay if the hostages were not released before he's sworn in to the White House next week. October 7th has been the defining issue of Ambassador Moed's time in Canada. He arrived to take up his duties just days before the Hamas attack in 2023. He hadn't even yet presented his credentials to the Governor General. They went into crisis mode. But in recent months, Moed has also been busy with other domestic Canadian files, such as lobbying Carleton University to stop employing an Ottawa sociology professor, Hassan Diab, a Lebanese Canadian of Palestinian origin, who was teaching a social justice course at the school last fall, despite a French court convicting him last spring of being the bomber in a 1980 attack on a Paris synagogue that killed 4 people, including Eliza Shagrir, the mother of the ambassador's personal family friend Chagai, who's also in Israel's foreign service. Canada did extradite Diab to France in 2014 to face justice the first time. His case went through the French legal system. He served 3 years in prison there. The charges were dropped. He returned to Canada, but in appeals, he was convicted. And even though Diab maintains his innocence, the possibility of a second extradition still hangs overhead. When the CJN originally approached the Israeli ambassador for an interview on the weekend, we were supposed to talk today about the Diab case. But as often happens in the news business, our planned interview changed with the pending hostage ceasefire deal now front page news. I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Tuesday, January 14th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. You're likely checking the news feeds regularly for the latest on the ceasefire hostage deal, and we are too. And the families of the hostages, including of the Canadian victim, Judy Weinstein-Hagai, and her husband, are also waiting to learn whether their remains will be returned from Gaza as part of the agreements. The couple were the first victims at kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th, when Hamas terrorists attacked that community. Other Canadian relatives are also waiting for news, including Maureen Lesham of Toronto. Her 23-year-old cousin Romy Gonen was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival. To find out more about the potential hostage ceasefire deal and what role the Israeli mission is playing in Canada in the whole process, I'm joined by Ambassador Iddo Moed from Ottawa. Just a reminder, our conversation was taped on Tuesday.
Good to be here.
You're watching it too, but you have better sources than we do. So can we start with, what do you have to do with Canadians who have families that are waiting for news?
So it's important to know that it's not just that these hostages are Israeli, they are actually citizens from around the world. And so we've been working very closely with governments, and the same also applies for the Canadian government, to make sure that among those hostages, for example, there is the remains of Judy Weinstein, who was killed on October the 7th, and her body is still being held by Hamas, that closure will come also to her family. And so we're working very closely with the international community, and Canada is as active as other countries are as well. And of course, we want to have this extremely excruciating issue resolved as quickly as possible. When you visit Israel, you'll see how much this issue is on everybody's top of the mind. And no matter which side of the political spectrum they stand, everybody wants to have all the hostages released as soon as possible. And I can tell you, I've just thought about this morning, that actually I'll be looking forward to changing this tie that I've been wearing for many, many, many months, which reminds me every day of Bibas and Bibas, the two kids, the two children, the toddlers that are being held captive by Hamas. We're all looking forward to their release and their parents. We need this closure. We need to move forward. We need to find ways also to create a new reality on the ground when it comes to the Palestinians. But first and foremost, we need to have our hostages back. And so we're all looking forward to this deal come to fruition as soon as possible.
Now, you're wearing this tie, and mentioning the kids' names, the Bibas children, comes to me as a surprise, but also some kind of confirmation that they're still alive, because that's who's supposed to come out first. Is that correct? Am I reading that from the news correct? That this is proof that they're not dead?
I wish. Hamas has refused time and again to divulge information who is alive and who is not, so we don't know. We know that the deal now is about 30-something hostages, and that those hostages will be the children, women, sick, and elderly people, but we don't know how many of them are alive, so we have no idea. We'll only find out when they will be released. So, and as you know, it's a prolonged deal. It's very complicated. Every few days, more hostages will be released. So all that technicalities are still being worked out, so I won't mention any numbers of days and hostages, but it's excruciating. The way it's going to take place is very, very painful for everybody involved, because you'll see every day another story and another story. All of them are horrific. Anybody who comes back after 465 days being held in the dungeons of Hamas is a drama in itself. So we'll just have to cope with that one day at a time.
Are there specific roles that your embassy kicks into high gear when we get the confirmation? So, for example, when Carmel Gat was found, her family from here went to Israel as quickly as they could. Are you doing that for everyone that's here, Vancouver, Montreal? There's other people besides the Weinstein guys.
So we are in touch with families of the victims, broadly speaking, just like, for example, Adi Vital Kaplun and others. We maintain those contacts as we go, but Oli Weinstein was here a while ago, and we met with her and went with her to some other meetings with politicians. We see that role as a sort of more on a humanitarian basis, because politically speaking, of course, Canada stands very closely to Israel and calls for the release of all the hostages. And so in that sense, it's more an issue of solidarity, but also very, very important to share this with the broader public, that this tragedy has been going on for such a long period of time, and it is actually at the basis of what is changing reality so much in the Middle East. The fact that Hamas, this genocidal terrorist organization, has set out to kill and or kidnap as many Israelis and Jews just because of who they are, actually changed so many things in the last 15 months that we don't even stand still for a moment and think about that. But we have to understand that horrific, barbaric act ignited a whole series of events that is changing the Middle East. Now, we are trying to come to terms with our neighbors in the region, and we will, because peace will prevail. Our neighbors and our counterparts in the region realize that what Israel is standing for is for peace and coexistence. But we do have to take care of this terrorist organization and those who are behind it, specifically Iran, of course, which is the head of the snake, as we call. They are the ones that have been actually financing, supporting, and arming all those terrorist organizations. So this is what we want the broader public to know. Beyond the humanitarian story, there is a horrific agenda that is being driven by the Ayatollahs of Iran to eradicate and destroy the state of Israel. And actually, some of that hateful and aggressive rhetoric and actions we see here in Canada when it comes to anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic attacks, including very violent ones against Jews and Jewish institutions.
Well, we speak about that. I know that in the fall, the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and Fighting Anti-Semitism of the Israeli government curiously focused on our country, on Canada, and that caught a lot of us by surprise. They must have consulted with you, of course, right? And your office to collect. How did that all come about? Why Canada first?
Because the incredible, unprecedented rise of very violent attacks here in Canada is just mind-boggling. So people in Israel are aware of that. It is beyond what is happening in any other country in the world almost. I mean, the fact that synagogues have been set to fire, that shooting at schools, and not to speak of the very hateful individual attacks that a lot of Canadian Jews have experienced throughout this period, all of that is, of course, is very worrying and very concerning. And so when we speak about the fact that so much is tolerated in the country, and that, for example, Hassan Diab, who was teaching at the university here in Ottawa, and now the university is saying he's not going to be employed, this is in itself an issue that doesn't really warrant a sort of a public action. I think universities by themselves have to understand that employing somebody who's been convicted of terrorism and who is responsible for the death of 4 people, one of them is also an Israeli, Aliza Shagrir, this is something that is intolerable. It's unthinkable. So the fact that all these things are happening in Canada is drawing a lot of attention in Israel. And we see that, we notice that various parts, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Diaspora, pay attention to it and we work together with them, with their support, to do whatever we can to stop this and to combat this spread of hatred and this very proactive, aggressive, intimidating behavior that has caused so many Jewish communities to feel that they are insecure. So one of the issues that we feel responsible for doing is to speak to government about that. We do that because of 2 reasons. One, as I just mentioned, Israel, which is the homeland of the Jewish people, is very concerned about the well-being of Jews all around the world. And so if there is a rise in anti-Semitism, we raise that with government counterparts to tell them we are very concerned. The second part is, of course, that bilaterally, the Jewish community of Canada has such strong ties with Israel, so supportive and so unique in its contribution to what Israel is today, that in terms of the bilateral relations, when the Jewish community here is threatened, it also threatens the bilateral relations. And so in those 2 respects, it is very important for us as embassy, as consulates general in Montreal and Toronto, to raise with authorities, be it local or federal, to raise the awareness for the fact that we are concerned and that we will do whatever we can to support any effort to thwart this aggressive behavior.
So there's going to be this anti-Semitism forum in February, supposedly, despite the fact that Justin Trudeau said he was going to be stepping down at the end of in March. Are you involved in it, first of all? Where does it sit with the embassy?
We have not been approached. We are not involved with that. But what we are doing is reaching out to the Jewish community throughout Canada, So I was in, for example, in Beit Tikva synagogue the following Shabbat after the arson attempt, just to be there with the community, because we are one people, we are one, and we are brothers and family. And so when something is happening here, it is our role also to be that, to show that kind of solidarity. That's extremely important. But whatever the Canadian government is doing, that is, of course, an internal issue, we can offer our support, we can offer our experience and know-how, be it from education point of view, like the Yad Vashem institution that has so many great programs that we can share, be it when it comes to law enforcement best practices that we have in Israel in combating anti-Semitism, or bringing experts from other countries that have worked with Israel. Sharing that kind of experience and know-how, that is something that we'll be more than happy to do. And anything else that we can agree on together with the Canadian government on the federal, regional, provincial, and municipal level will do, because we want to be there to make sure that not only the Jewish community feels more safe, but actually also that aspect of our bilateral relations is handled satisfactorily.
I mean, the relationship between the Trudeau government and Israel has been, as you know, very strained since the positions that the government's taken at the United Nations, funding UNRWA, stopping the export permits for arms. Does the embassy have anything, or the Israeli government have anything that they want to say about the change in government that may be happening in the next few months, and maybe a conservative prime minister?
I won't go into any kind of issue that has to do with the elections. It's an entirely internal affair. And of course, we'll just follow and see how things develop and not interfere with that in any way, shape, or form. But I would say this: when it comes to understanding the challenges that the Middle East is facing, we are doing our utmost to work with government and parliament to make sure that everybody understands what we are talking about. For example, when it comes to UNRWA, an organization that perpetuates the refugee problem, is actually in contradiction to a two-state solution or any kind of peaceful solution, because their sole intent is to educate Palestinians to hate Israel and to make them understand that Israel will have no future. So funding UNRWA is actually funding those who are against any kind of a peaceful solution, and that is, of course, in direct contradiction with Canadian policies. So we are trying to make sure that they are aware of that, beyond the fact that, of course, UNRWA has been employing terrorists, and then that some of their employees have been responsible for the October 7th massacre.
My name is Rivka Campbell, and I am the host of the CJN podcast, Rivkush. My podcast is a focus on Jews of color talking about anything. It's really important for mainstream Jews to see that I am just as Jewish as you. The topics that interest you also interest me. I want to talk about Israel. You want to talk about Israel. I want to talk about food. Maybe it's not the food you want to talk about, but I want to talk about food. It's important that the person talking about Judaism, Israel, whatever, has a face like mine. It really, hopefully, changes the perception of Jews of color. To support my podcast and the rest of the CJN, please make a tax-deductible donation at thecjn.ca/donate.
Let's go back to your topic about Hassan Diab. In November, so it's actually November 12th, your article came out in the National Post talking about your personal feelings and relationship to the family of one of the four murdered victims, the Copernicus Synagogue in Paris, for which Hassan Diab was convicted in absentia and is still, as you said, was teaching until recently at Carleton. How did that article come about?
So we came to the conclusion that a university, an academic institution, respectable academic institutions that allows a terrorist to be a teacher and give a course at their premises is so principally wrong that we have to make the public aware and share our opinion with as broad as possible audience, and to let them understand that, for example, in this case, of course, we're talking about a convicted terrorist that is, of all things, speaks about social justice. So he is trying to abuse the academia to prove his innocence. Now, he had his day in court, and there were appeals, and he had all the potential to fight back within the legal system. He was convicted. He was convicted by a respectable democratic country that, of course, no one here will challenge their impartial legal system. So once that has been established, how can somebody allow a terrorist, a convicted terrorist, to teach at the university? The very least is think about him as controversial person. But allowing him to actually to encourage his students to earn more points and bonus points by being activists for him is even worse. So this whole event is for us a wake-up call, because we see not only Hassan Diab, but we see other figures who have very clear anti-Semitic agenda appearing in universities and speaking freely as if what they are presenting is the reality, and it is entirely flawed and wrong. Now, I'm all for academic freedom, and I'm all for criticism politically or any other way. But presenting a distorted reality as a fact and starting the discussion from there is, of course, wrong. That's fundamentally wrong. And so when we're talking to university leaders around the country, when I'm speaking with them, and I'm talking not just about the encampments and all this intimidating behavior that has been experienced by Jewish students there, I'm speaking about the curriculum and about the fact that if you want to understand the problem, you have to understand it from an objective point of view. And that is actually the very core principle of academic freedom. And I don't think that's always respected. In many cases, in the last few years, especially here in Canada, we've seen too many cases where it is not respected. And that is wrong. And this is why this article came about.
I know that Shagrir, the last name, Lisa Shagrir was changed. It was an Austrian name. It means diplomat.
Ambassador.
I know that ambassador. And the children, one of them, Chagai, is a friend of yours. Both of them are friends of yours. But Chagai is also a diplomat in the foreign service now, an expert in China. You were in China. How do you know each other?
Our paths crossed actually when I was in Beijing, and Chagai was our desk officer. And so he came to visit, and this is how we met. So we've known each other for many, many years. And he's an exemplary diplomat, a very smart and wise person. You know, just by discussing this case here and informing him of what is transpiring, I feel from him a sort of a special sense of gratitude and coming closer to a closure. Of course, is losing his mother. He was there in Paris when his mother was murdered.
And where was he when she was killed?
He stayed at the hotel. He didn't feel well, so he stayed at the hotel, and his mother was out by the synagogue. She was on the street, actually, when she was killed. All four died by a car bomb that exploded in the street.
How did your embassy, if at all, help this Carleton situation, and the extradition situation, well, under your watch?
So the extradition is a bilateral process between France and Canada. It's not for us to relate to. We want to see Hassan Diab serve his sentence as it was given to him by the French authorities in a French cell. That this is where he belongs, and this will serve justice as was administered by the French Supreme Court. I think that this is the right path, but when it comes to the actual process, it's an internal process. It's a bilateral process between France and Canada, and that is underway. And so we are not interfering that in any way, shape, or form beyond just saying what I just stated now.
So you said it's underway, because nobody's saying whether it's underway or not. The government's been saying we can't talk about it.
Yeah, I can't go into details.
And what would you like people to know about how the car bombing in 1980 and Canada's hosting this man all these years has impacted your friend and his brother and the family?
I can't speak for him, but I think that when we are so many years away from that event, and I can hear in his voice the sense of need for closure and the sense of justice being served, I think that all of us have to understand that we need justice to be served when it comes to hatred, when it comes to terrorism, when it comes to this kind of aggressive, intimidating behavior that is there, that has only one origin, and that is to kill and to destroy others. In this case, it's Jews and Israel. But there is also other kinds of hatred and sense of horrific, of kind of supremacy even. And this reminds us of very dark days. And we have to do whatever we can to remember the past to have a better future. We are about to commemorate the International Holocaust Day on January 27th. And on that day, the international community stops and thinks about not only the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp, but also about the fact that we cannot, as open and free and tolerant societies, we cannot condone anybody destroying another people. And it is extremely important. There are so many examples of such attempts around the world. We have to fight that, and we have to stand up for what is right. And in that case, we are actually trying to mobilize the group that is the hardest to mobilize, and that is the silent majority. It's silent, but it's a majority. There's a very big group of people who have to stand up and speak out every now and then, just to let the world know where our compass is leading us. And our compass and our overall society's compass leads us towards peaceful coexistence, respect for each other, and support for and tolerance for each other. It is hard because the extremists usually take over the street with their voices or with their actions, but we have to stop that. And this is a wake-up call for all of us that we have to do. We cannot just take things for granted. We have to be proactive.
Speaking about that, there was supposed to be a conference by a terrorist designated group by the UK and other countries, not here in Canada, as you know, in Mississauga. I'm not going to mention the name, but we know that it's been in the news in the last few weeks. And we learned just before we started our interview that they've canceled the conference. It was supposed to start on the 17th. What is the embassy's position on the conference, and what do you how's your reaction?
So we do a few things. First of all, we flag whatever events are happening when we think that they are dangerous, they are insightful, they are about to spread more hate and intimidation. Of course, we raise a flag and we use our channels of communication with the highest levels in the provincial or federal level to address and to reach out to the leaders and to draw to their attention that this is taking place. We also provide information.
So you did that with this one, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's extremely important.
RCMP, who? Hamilton, Mayor, who did you guys talk to? Or you're not saying?
I don't want to go into details, but I want just to use this specific event to highlight again a phenomenon that we see. And so we have to keep vigilant. We have to act. We have to stand up against these issues, but we also have to respect the fact that others have different opinions. So there is a very thin line that we are actually around. We are around that all the time. That is between what is acceptable and not acceptable in society. And actually, we have to be very vigilant these days, and we have to be very well aware of where we stand and what do we stand for and what we will not tolerate. So in this case, I don't know what is the reason that this event is not going through, but I know that the federal authorities were very well aware of it. And that is in itself, of course, very important, but more needs to be done to prevent for such people even to come in and to spread this kind of hateful messages, because it is absolutely wrong.
Would you also like to comment, though, on whether Canada should declare this group, the Hizb ut-Tahrir, as a terrorist organization the way other countries have done? Is there any position
Absolutely,
on that?
Yes. I think that Canada should designate this organization as a terrorist organization, as a terrorist entity under the criminal law, as it has done with Samidun and many others. It is called for. Other countries have done that. So this is also a call for Canada to do it the same. Absolutely.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to check our website, thecjn.ca, for updates on this story and the Caliphate Conference and the extradition request from France to Canada, so that Professor Diab can serve out his sentence for the bombing in Paris.
Hi, I'm Avi Feingold. I'm the co-host of Bonjour Chai on the CJN Podcast Network and a contributing editor for the CJN magazine. Bonjour Chai is Canada's weekly Jewish discussion and debate podcast. We discuss the issues that are important to Jewish Canadians. The stereotype of Canadians is that we either all agree with each other or we disagree and we don't want to talk about it and we don't fight and we don't argue. We do our thing quietly and off to the side. And it's not always true. I like to think that Canadian Jews have strong disagreements, but that are respectful about it. I think historically that has been the case. And hearing two people disagree in a loving, friendly, idea-based sort of way, hopefully is a model for other people to have these conversations themselves. And I think it's important for people to be able to hear these things. We can't do this without your support. Your donation goes a long way to helping us bring you the stories that you want to hear. Please visit thecjn.ca/donate. And if you're Canadian, you can even get a tax receipt.